Howdy friends, thank you for joining me for another weekly check-in video from Soul Friend Astrology. I'm so glad that you all have decided to join me for this journey through what's going on with our cosmic weather. A couple of you have asked about getting consultations, so I wanted to make sure that I have that information up front so that it's easy for you to find. All you need to do is go to my website, soulfriendastrology.com, and click consultations up at the top, and it'll take you to my booking portal where you have the opportunity to book and pay online. If you have any questions about that, feel free to leave a comment below or just shoot me an email, send me a private message, any way you want to get in touch with me. Please also take a moment to hit the subscribe button and share if you haven't already, and head over to Twitter if you're on Twitter and connect with me there at Ryan Caradog. So we've got two main stories happening this week that I want to highlight. The first of which is the Mercury story that's continuing to be centered around Mercury's retrograde journey through the first degrees of Sagittarius and into the final degrees of Scorpio. So Mercury just finished his inferior conjunction to the Sun, which means that Mercury has been reborn and is beginning a new synodic cycle, a new trip around the Sun, which means that there are new things that are going to emerge in the coming days as this particular Mercury retrograde period wraps up, and we'll start to see what those are. But the very first thing that Mercury does after he leaves the heart of the Sun for his inferior conjunction is that he meets up with Jupiter. And Jupiter has also just been in the heart of the Sun and has been reborn, except Jupiter here is direct, and Jupiter here has a boon to hand off to Mercury. It's almost as if Jupiter has something that Mercury needs to know before Mercury continues his journey backwards into Scorpio. Mercury is heading out of the sign of ideals, out of the sign of dreams and visions and expansion, back into that murky, watery place that we've been hearing a lot about as a result of Venus's retrogression in Scorpio. The other thing, too, that's happening with this is that Venus, who has left Scorpio back into Libra and has stationed direct, will also be joining Mercury in the sign of Scorpio, even though she won't come into a conjunction with Mercury quite yet. That happens quite a bit later. But we've got both of these personal planets moving into the sign that is fixed water, that is deep emotionality, that is things hidden, things unseen, things deep below the surface. And in thinking about this, what came to mind was the idea of hidden griefs. All of the water signs have associations with emotions. They deal with matters of our connection to one another as humans. They deal with empathy. They deal with how we form bonds with one another. Whereas air signs accomplish that through the world of the head, water signs accomplish that through the world of the heart. And in this particular season of the year, as I mentioned last week, and that's the thread that I'm going to pick up here, for many of us, as I mentioned, once again, this time of year is not one where it's easy to be public about our grieving. And so as both Mercury and Venus are entering into Scorpio, and as Mercury has just received the boon of what Jupiter has given him, this gift for him to carry into the darknesses of Scorpio, which we might surmise would be related to ideals, would be related to the light at the end of the tunnel, or the transformative fruit of healthy grieving. Perhaps Mercury can carry that back with him into Scorpio to do some of the work that was left undone there. A couple of my friends and I have been talking about how these past couple of days, especially after Jupiter's contact with Mars earlier in this week, or last week really, how these past couple of days have really brought about a sense of nostalgia, a sense of longing for the past. And I think Mercury's travel back into Scorpio signifies that beautifully. Because what we're doing when we're thinking about the past is we're kind of dreaming in reverse, right? What is past exists now only in our imaginations and only in our dreams. And so there's an extent to which we can't go back and change the past necessarily, but we can change how we are dreaming about it now. We can change how we're reflecting on it. And we can adapt the ways we continue to process the past and how we make that processing manifest in the here and now. What have we not yet learned from past griefs? What have we not yet learned from past losses? What have we not yet learned or borne out in our here and now about past emotional wounds? Perhaps Mercury's travel back into Scorpio will give us all an opportunity to be nostalgic about things that may not necessarily be fun to think about, but bolstered by Jupiter as he has been, Mercury will be able to bring these things forward in a way that could perhaps be healing for all of us. And the poison of those griefs and those losses can be transformed into medicine, because after all, Mercury changes things up. The other story that I want to highlight this week is the Mars story, and I think this dovetails nicely because this Mercury-Venus thing is happening in a Mars-ruled sign. Scorpio is, of course, ruled by Mars in the traditional framework, which is the framework that I work out of. So Mars in the early degrees of Pisces has just completed his square with Jupiter, where we saw a tension between our desires and our ideals. And now Mars is encountering a sextile with Saturn, right? So we've got these two bad guys in the sky in an arrangement that's a little bit constructive. Sextiles are not a bad, air quotes, bad angle for planets to interact in. Bernadette Braddy describes sextiles as being about opportunity, unexpected opportunity. And if we combine the meanings of Mars being desire here in Pisces, where there's a diffusion of desire, and Mars is not sure exactly how to move forward in a straight line here. Mars kind of has to feel it out and figure out where he's going. For Mars then to encounter Saturn, who is in a position where he is very constructive, and Capricorn is going to create opportunities where Mars can start to find the perimeter of his desire. He can start to find some inclusive boundaries. When we talk about boundaries, we often are talking about boundaries in the sense of the negative sense, right? No, you can't talk to me like that. No, you can't do this. No, you can't go there. But sometimes we neglect to talk about boundaries in the sense of positive boundaries or inclusive boundaries, right? So Saturn in Capricorn, as he gets this sextile aspect from Mars, is going to say to Mars, hey, I see that you're having some trouble figuring out where to go. So let me help you. Here's where you can go. Here's where you have the ability to do what you want. Here's how you can best use this energy that's kind of spread out a little bit. Here's how we can kind of focus it down to a particular area. These are the boundaries that you can exist and you can do what you need to do within. And all of this, Mars is of course overseen by Jupiter here. So Jupiter is wanting Mars to be able to work constructively because Mars is in Jupiter's home base of Pisces, right? So as Mars is able to encounter some of these constructive boundaries, Mars's ability to put some fire underneath those Jupiterian ideals and make them happen a little bit more efficiently is going to be amplified and improved. So let me give you an example of how this might work out. Suppose you are a Libra rising, right? Suppose you've got Libra on the ascendant. That means your first house is going to be in the sign of Libra. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to do this in whole sign houses just because it's easier. So you got Libra on the ascendant. That means Saturn right now is going to be in your fourth house of home and family. Mars is going to be over in your sixth house of duty and responsibility, and also physical sickness, and also pets. There are a lot of different topics that get bundled into the 6th and the 12th house. But as Mars, who in your chart is actually ruling your second house as well as your seventh house, so the house of finances and the house of relationships. As Mars is forming that constructive sextile to Saturn, Saturn is in Saturn's own sign, Saturn's own house here. Mars is going to encounter some limits that come in from influences like family, influences like upbringing, influences like your home life, where you live, to give you some kind of structure as to how you are applying your finances responsibly, right? Or how you are maybe engaging in a new relationship that may have just come to the fore in ways that actually build the relationship up instead of feeling like you just have to be kind of slavishly codependent on this person just because you're not sure how your desires are manifesting in relationship with them. To take another example, let's suppose that you have, I'm going to turn my chart real quick. Let's suppose that you have Cancer rising, right? Another cardinal sign. That means Saturn is now in your 7th house. Mars is in your 9th house, okay? Saturn's in 7, Mars is in 9. And with Cancer rising, Mars is going to rule the 5th house as well as the 10th. So in this instance, your partner, Saturn, or a business partner or associate, is going to create some inclusive boundaries for you to explore your career, possibly, Mars being the 10th house, especially if you've been encountering some uneasiness with where you're headed in terms of career, and if not your career, then how you relate to fun and pleasure and creativity. And perhaps if this is the kind of relationship that you're in, you and your partner may decide that since Mars, who is your 5th ruler, is now transiting your 9th house, Pisces, you may be entering into a season where kids come more to the fore in your conversations. You may be entering into a season where creative work in that sense comes more to the fore in your conversations. But since Mars is in the 9th, this is going to be about some travel, some higher beliefs and ideals about what creativity and career look like in your life. Maybe this means you getting your act together or getting your ideas together about where it is that you want to go in terms of your career, or the kind of family that you want to create with your partner, right? That's just one possible interpretation, and there are a lot of different things that go into making these interpretations work, which is why it's a very hard thing to make general statements about millions of different people's charts based simply on the weather, because everybody's chart is like a piece of sheet music being played by different bands, right? Even if you have a really similar chart to someone else, you're going to be in a different setting. So different people who have Cancer rising may experience this Mars-Saturn sextile in different ways. And there's a lot that we can get into on that front. But again, the point here is that Saturn is going to offer some constructive boundaries for Mars to flourish in, right? Because Mars does best when he has somewhere to focus his energy. The other component of this Mars story that I want to bring up is the Sun's square to Mars. This is the closing square. So as the Sun is approaching Mars, so we had the opposition. This is the closing square of the Mars-Sun cycle. So back in the summer, when Mars was retrograde, we had the Mars-Sun opposition, where Mars was at his brightest and his closest to Earth. Now, this is the closing square where the Sun has advanced a little more and is going to begin to bring this 2-year Mars cycle to a hold, or to an end. So whatever was happening with you in this past summer in relation to the Mars retrograde, that's going to wrap up at this square probably. Or the last major events as part of that story will wrap up as a result of that square. This transit actually perfects on December 2nd, this coming Sunday at 7:30 in the evening. And this is actually going to be active for about a week or so while the Sun and Mars are in orb of one another as Mars is proceeding through Pisces. So look out for those things that were really overtly evidenced at the Mars opposition this past summer. And look for some resolving events. We're beginning to enter the denouement of this particular season. And since this is a square, we're going to experience it as tension, right? We're going to experience particularly a tension between the natural significations of the Sun, which is the ego, or perhaps the higher self. And again, this Mars principle that is about desire, being in Pisces where it's very diffuse. And the change is that this Mars will still be being bound in and corralled a little bit by Saturn. So if this past summer was destructive for you in a way, this coming Sun-Mars square may be a little bit more constructive. Thanks so much for joining me. If you have any questions about the interpretation that I offered, if you're a Cancer rising or a Libra rising and I made you mad, let me know, and I'll come back and try to nuance my interpretation a little bit better. But I'm really interested in engaging with the stories that you all are experiencing right now. So please leave a note down below. Tell me what you think, and I'm happy to engage with you. Thanks so much for being part of the Soul Friend community. Be well.